There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac, and this is a friendly, familiar face, Curtis of Curtis Books and Books. Hello, Curtis.
Hi, Shawn. Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you back. You can stay. You don't have to leave again. Just stay. We're talking about this 1917 British novella, Caprice by Ronald Firbank, the gayest British writer ever, and wrote in the early part of the 20th century. And Curtis and I have talked about him previously, because Curtis has read his complete works. I read, I believe it was a later novella. What's the full title? I got it right when we talked the other day in something Cardinal Pirelli.
Eccentricities of Cardinal Pirelli, and that was 1926.
So it's a later one, and I found it almost impenetrable. It was so stylized with so much unfamiliar vocabulary in it, foreign phrases and so on. I didn't not enjoy it, but it gave me a headache. It gave me a big gay headache, all the words I had to look up. This one I found much more simplistic in its style, much more accessible, and we'll get more into our impressions of it. But it was because Curtis had read the complete works, and I had had this kind of quasi-negative experience with another one of his books that we agreed to have a pseudo buddy read. So we have barely discussed our reaction to the book. We're going to do that live in real time now. Curtis, what did you think of Caprice from 1917?
Well, as you know, it's one of my favorites of his, and possibly partly because it is more accessible than his other works, but also it's just quite funny. I just love the story, the setup of it. You can relate to the main character straight away, and you sort of want to succeed. So basically, the story is Miss Sarah Sinclair comes from a rural background, and her father is a clergyman or deacon. We weren't quite sure actually, and she wants to go to move into the acting community in London and make it on in theatre. And so you're sort of rooting for her to do that. And I guess I think you agree, Shawn, it's quite satirical of that world. It sort of makes fun of that world.
It doesn't sound like her home life is particularly unhappy or anything, but she really wants to seize her big chance to. And she has one contact in London, Mrs. Bromley, I think, or Miss Bromley, but she makes it happen. So we're not going to have any spoilers until we warn you later in the chat that we're moving into spoiler territory. But she steals some kind of heirlooms or brass candlesticks or something from the family home in order to pay her way to London. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah.
I love that scene. And so her home is not in London. So she's coming from outside London into London, and they kind of refer to that district or that part of London as the Boards. And do you know about that? Do you know any more about that? I think it was that there was boards on the street where they put the theater posters up. I think that's why it was called the Boards. But I did find reference to that in some of the literary criticism. But
well,
anyway,
you know more than me.
Well, that's a modern miracle, if ever there was one. So let me give my overall impression. I didn't really care for it. I finished it. It was easy to read.
Yeah.
I didn't get invested. I enjoyed the campiness of the writing, but I didn't really end up rooting for her maybe the way you did. But I'm glad I read it, and it was certainly a more positive experience. I'd say this was a 3-star read for me, and it doesn't make me any less interested to find out more about Ronald Firbank, the man. So you and I have a quasi commitment to buddy read a very lengthy biography of Ronald Firbank next year by, what's her name?
Brigid Brophy.
Brigid Brophy. Yes.
Yeah.
Which has Prancing Novelist, which is the best. As long as you don't dwell too much on where she gets the title from, it's the best title possible for a book about the campiest writer of any century, Ronald Firbank. Prancing Novelist.
Well, I was going to ask you what you thought of the writing itself, because I wasn't sure if you'd find it, repellent, because it wasn't. It's literary prose, but it's overly flowery, and it's
very flowery.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a little bit experimental.
A little bit modernist, would you say?
Yeah, yeah.
And Ronald Firbank's been named as an antecedent and influence on, for example, Isabel. What's her name?
Ivy Compton Burnett.
Ivy Compton Burnett. I was the big hair. And also he's been claimed by Alan Hollinghurst as an influence.
Muriel Spark as well, I think.
Muriel
you
Spark.
do like?
Yes, that's some of her stuff. Yeah. I'm glad it was short. I don't think I would have been able to carry on too much longer with that style, but it was, compared to the Cardinal Pirelli book, it was accessible and I could follow the story. I mean, I had to ask you a few clarifying questions before we started recording because I wasn't sure about this, that, or that, but no, it was fine. But I think you enjoyed it more than I did. The style.
Yeah, especially in this example. I mean, it can be grating in his other works. I think in the introduction to my copy of the book, actually, he says it's not really an author you want to be reading from start to finish. It's more sort of a companion on your bedside table. You sort of pick it up and read a bit here and there, and it helps that the chapters are short as well. It helps you to do that, and the novel itself is short, so it's almost like he's good in sort of bite-sized pieces. But too much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I read this over actually several weeks, even though
I noticed.
Yes.
See, I finished it. I finished it over. Must be 2 or 3 weeks ago now. So, and 2 or 3 weeks in my reading time frame may as well be 2 years, because I can hardly remember what I read yesterday.
What, if anything, did you make of the fact that the woman that she had a contact in London, and she went to see her immediately after she got to Euston Station, I believe, and this Mrs. Bromley had just died? Did you attach any import to that at all?
It was just a very Firbankian event.
It was. Okay, tell me more. What is a Firbankian event?
I don't think that's an official term, but it's just,
you've just coined it.
Yeah. You heard it here first. It's just one of those things. These things happen out of nowhere without explanation, and they're not returned to either. And you almost have to second guess yourself, like, did that really happen? Because like no one's talking about it. Hasn't seemed to have affected the plot too much. And obviously, and of course, there's a thing that happens at the end, which we'll talk about later, perhaps. But it's just one of those things, I guess, you just have to accept has happened. But I wouldn't attach too much importance to it. But it's just the way the narrative unfolds is quite stuttery. It sort of jumps in time a little bit, and you just have to connect the dots in between the chapters.
Yes, I love that stuttery. And then Miss Inquire. You thought there might be a little pun there, which I think is a fabulous idea about the book. Pretty much right after that, she goes to a cafe to kind of collect her thoughts or figure out what she's going to do next, and she ends up sitting down with at a table or near a table of actors, right, or theater people.
I think so. Yeah.
They kind of latch on to her, and I did enjoy that passage. I thought those characters they really came to life just through the dialogue and the repartee between them, and the way that they just kind of took Miss Inquire on, and that was really the turning point in the novel, which is that she found her way to the stage through the connection she made by chance there. So that's another perhaps Firbankian event, because it just kind of happened randomly, but it really affected her life.
Yeah, there's one scene, I think shortly after that, when she's talking to one of those actors or one of those connections that she's made, and she's trying to decide whether Miss Inquire is a comedic actor or a tragic actor, and she auditions there.
It's like an audition, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so funny.
It is funny. That one, I'd maybe missed a lot of the humor, but I got the humor of that because she gets her to say just 2 or 3 different words and then says, "Oh, you're definitely not right for this role, but this role just 4 words." Yeah, that was funny. there were quite a few homosexuals in this book for such a tiny little book. Wasn't there a gay couple that were both actors?
Yeah, a couple of actors that share a studio, I think.
I think they share more than a studio. and that was pretty shocking for a 1917 novel. And I will be interested to read more of the reception to his work in his own day in the biography we're going to read. And then Miss Inquirer herself I think it's how subtle did you find it that she got into a lesbian relationship with Miss Mant?
I think it was subtle enough for him to get away with it at the time. But to a modern audience, it's clearer. I think there are more not explicit examples, but clearer examples in some of his other novels. I was to say, compared to those, it was more subtle, I would say. Yeah.
And this was an earlier novel, right?
True. Yeah.
You have read his complete works, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So my question is, because I can't comment on this, but I'd like to get you to. I've read in the literary criticism that he had a tendency to portray queerness in his fiction more through lesbian relationships than through gay male relationships. Is that true?
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
on that?
I don't know what to think about that, but in the novella, I think it's Inclinations, which is one of my other favorites. That's basically the whole novella is about that. It's very interesting. I don't know what to think about it. What do you think about it?
Well, I don't know. Was there a sense in which it's kind of like, well, I don't know, Queen Victoria, she refused to sign the bill outlawing homosexuality because it referred to female homosexuality, right. And she said women never do things like that. So was he being more challenging to the status quo by delving into that in his fiction, or was there a sense by the World War I that was a safer topic for discussion than male homosexuality? I am fascinated, and I don't know. I hope that the biography shed some light on that, because that's very.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Maybe he thought he was being more obscure when he was doing that. I don't know, but yeah, I hope we'd find out.
I guess just think about it a little bit more. Portraying physical affection between females in Western culture has always been more acceptable than portraying physical affection between men who are not related to each other. So in that sense, it might have been safer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So interesting, because there certainly was more than a hint of mint in in the portrayal of Miss Inquirer and Miss Mant. Any comment on the ligatures? You know what a ligature is? I had to learn it to find out what the hell this was. Ligature is, maybe I knew it at one time. It's that weird thing over the STs, the S and the T, to join them. Oh, maybe yours doesn't have it. Does yours have the?
I don't think so. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Let me see if I can put it right on the screen here, and then it would be in the video that way. But I posted this on Instagram looking for help. Oh, did you find it?
Yeah, but it doesn't have ligatures.
Oh, it doesn't? Okay. Well, Here's what it looks like in my book. Every instance. So it's in the very first sentence, insistent. And it's little thing at the top. Okay. And if you look, there's a whole bunch more. Contrasting.
That is strange.
Yeah, it is. And I've done just 3 minutes of research. Oh, and there's the comment that I didn't actually. Oh, I guess I did see.
Is that a facsimile of the original print then, or something?
That's what I'm wondering, but it's not in your collected works.
It's not. No, definitely not.
So that would be a publisher choice, right? It wouldn't have been his choice. I don't know.
Well, I imagine so, but do you know what the meaning is behind that? Or I don't think
I couldn't find that it had much of a meaning other than stylistic.
No, okay.
Because, no, sorry. I did find that in certain fonts, with the S and the T, the top of the S runs right into the T, and it's not necessarily easy to read it.
Okay.
in certain fonts, and that's what the ligature was for.
Right. Okay. Oh, I never knew
But I
that.
don't. That's all. But I just wonder if there's something more going on with that. If they were supposed to read something, whether it's queer or some kind of coding, I don't know. But it was interesting because I noticed it right away because it's right there in the.
Yeah.
And in fact, I loved probably one of my favorite passages in this novel is the opening paragraph, and it does resonate, if I can use that verb, to the there's reference to the bells at the end as well. I'm just going to read it. The clangor
Yeah.
of bells grew insistent. In uncontrollable hilarity pealed, and that should be Saint Mary. Is that how you pronounce that?
Yep.
Yeah. In uncontrollable hilarity pealed Saint Mary, contrasting clearly with the subdued carillon of Saint Mark. From all sides, seldom in unison, resounded bells. Saint Elizabeth and Saint Sebastian in Flower Street seemed in loud dispute, while Saint Anne on the hill, all hollow, cracked, consumptive, fretful, did nothing but complain. Nearby Saint Nicaise, half paralyzed and impotent, feebly shook. Then, triumphant, in a hurricane of sound, Saint Irene hushed them all. It was Sunday again. But I thought that was just a really great set piece.
Yeah.
And then we do return to the bells at the end.
Yeah. In fact, it's almost word for word the same at the end, which is quite nice.
Yes.
There's not much narrative structure in his novels, but there's nice sort of closure at the end, I suppose.
Well, let's move into the end because I don't think we have much more else to say. So we're now going to get into spoilers. There's really only one spoiler, so don't watch from now to the end if you don't want spoilers. And the big spoiler is that after she launches her play, and she both is kind of the manager, like she's the what would you say, the producer of the play, but also an actor in the play. Is that right?
Yeah.
I was unclear about that too. So, and has a great opening night, basically, really good reception. But then she dies tragically by falling into the orchestra pit or something.
I mean, even that's not entirely clear. I've read it. I was telling Shawn before, I've read it twice, and I still wasn't sure how exactly she died. And it's so shocking when it happens. And again, you think, did that really happen? And suddenly we're at her funeral. So
suddenly we're at her funeral, and Miss Six Smith goes to the funeral and tries to console the father who may or may not be grieving. Well, I think he's grieving, but
I kind of feel sorry for the father in that event.
Yeah, and she had invited her parents to come to the opening night, but they didn't go.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know if that was ever explained, but going back to Mrs. Bromley dying suddenly at the beginning, and this is another very sudden death of the protagonist, and I believe that is a bit of a pattern in some of Firbank's other works, that there's a tragic end to the story.
Yeah, I think there's another example of a character, I can't even remember which novella it is, but someone is basically struck by lightning and dies. So it's pretty common for these random deaths to occur.
How did you experience the ending? You said you talked about being kind of shocked. Were you moved? Were you like, did you feel deeply attached to this protagonist?
No, I wouldn't say I was moved. I mean, it's almost disappointing because you want to see the narrative progress and you want to see it succeed. It's just, I suppose you have to try and see it as being funny in a way, and just a random event. It's all satirical. I think that's the main point. So, but no, I wouldn't say I was moved.
And I think that's the main reason why I didn't really get along with the book, because I didn't ever feel invested. And that's one of the reasons I dislike satire, because it just seems like one of the unwritten rules is thou shalt not get attached to these characters. They are pawns of the satirical imagination.
I like that.
Oh, let's end on. I thought I had a cockamamie idea, but you thought that I might be onto something. So let's redo that to tie up the end of this video. I remember Cardinal Pirelli in that novel, that I just felt like he didn't walk, he processed he just seemed to be moving in a waft of incense as he was going down the hall to the kitchen, like he just proceeded. And I felt that something similar with Miss Inquire in this novel, and you thought that you've kind of picked that up too.
Yes, I mean, as we briefly discussed, I think partly the way the narrative structure works, as it sort of skips through the narrative, and she sort of glides through the narrative in a way, like you say.
Glide is a
And
really nice word to describe it.
yeah, and the fact that she comes from outside of that world, so she is, moving through it almost processionally, as you say.
Processionally, and I would like the campiness, the queeniness of there's a regality, there's a regalness to that processional kind of way of moving through the world. I remember as she was walking through London, not the whole city, but whatever area, there was just something about that made me think back to Cardinal Pirelli. So that's a Firbankian.
Yeah, that's really
a Firbankian gate. A Firbankian gate.
It's really interesting. It's not something that ever occurred to me, but when you say it, it absolutely rings true. And yeah, it's good. It's good to get
I feel so much less alone, Curtis. I feel so much less alone. So who knows what we'll find in the biography about these and the other tantalizing questions we have teased out of this short 1917 novella, but I'm glad that we did it together.
Yes, me too. I'm really looking forward to reading the biography as well. Yes. So many questions, and it just seems like a really interesting book. So yeah, I can't wait.
If anybody wants to read alongside us, I'll put the link to the Goodreads entry for the Prancing Novelist by, what's her name again?
Brigid Brophy.
By Brigid Brophy in the show notes. And we'll be reading that sometime, maybe late winter, early spring, something like that. It's a chunky biography. And Curtis, this was fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much again for having me, Shawn.